Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome back to another video game review, guys. Today's review, and I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly, called Infinity Strash, Dragon Quest: The Adventure of Dai. That's a long-ass title, Square Enix. A very long-ass title. But with that being said, I've been wanting to play this game for a long time, since they first originally announced the game and everything like that. And I finally got to play it. And before I talk about my overall thoughts and opinions, let me first go ahead and kind of briefly give you a small little history so that way you guys know. So, I thought this game was going to be like its own thing, you know, its own thing from the original Dragon Quest series. It kind of is, but not in the same way that you would think. You know, if you're like me, you thought, oh, this is his own game series. Okay, Infinity Strash. That's pretty cool. However, though, that's not the case. So, technically, this is based on an already existing series that was originally done as a manga series and is technically an anime adaptation series, and it's just now getting released in the States, technically in the form of a Netflix series. So, yeah, just to let people know, I thought this was its own thing. It is not. It is technically based on an existing franchise series, basically in the title of The Adventures of Dai, Dragon Quest. So, yeah, this is going to be a little bit interesting. Right off the back, I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh, this is an action RPG series, you know, much like the lines of like Kingdom Hearts or something like that. Not exactly, I'm afraid. If nothing else, it's sort of like how... what would be the best game to describe it? I guess the way that the Dragon Ball Z games are being done. For example, the Goku game, where you're basically playing through and everything based on the story, but you're also in a kind of an open world way type thing. It's kind of like that, except it's also taking parts strictly from the anime, and not only is it doing it in video game form, but also you're getting the story from the anime itself. Now, on the one hand, this is okay, but on the other hand, the way they kind of did it, it's a little bit on what you would call, I guess depending on if you've seen the anime or not, a little bit of a redundant, because they literally not so much rip it, but word for word basically took the entire story and tried to put it into the video game itself. Almost kind of like a storytelling arc, basically. Basically telling you the story of the Adventure of Dai, basically what happens in the series and stuff like that. Story for story, chapter per chapter and stuff. Now, on the one hand, this isn't a bad thing, but on the other hand, because I hadn't seen the anime, I didn't know anything about it, so therefore I wanted to watch the whole thing. And on the one hand, part of me was like, you know, I probably would have enjoyed watching the anime better than I would just watching it being read to me, basically. So depending on if you've seen the anime or not, depends on the level of enjoyment you're probably going to have. For example, if you've already seen the anime, then chances are you can easily skip through this and just go on into the actual gameplay mechanics, which isn't a bad thing. If you haven't seen it, you're going to most likely be watching these and are probably going to be slightly irritated at the fact that they're not like fully animated per se. It's just, you know, basically a storytelling book style type thing. And it's one of those things where it's just like, I don't know, I felt like that execution could have done a little bit better. There are some cases where it is actually animated, which they look awesome. You know, for what this is, this looks way better than it should. In all honesty, it does. It does look good. But then you just mostly get the screenshot page per page type thing, and it's like, I don't know, it to me it felt irritating in a way. But outside of the story, let's get into the combat itself. And the combat ranges from somewhat simplistic to somewhat technical. So what do I mean by somewhat simplistic? Well, it's basically sort of like that of the best way that I can describe it, basically a Dynasty Warrior game. There are times where the gameplay feels like it should be Dynasty Warriors, where there should be a lot more enemies on screen, and sometimes they do take advantage of having a lot more enemies on screen, but not all the time, especially early on. Early on, the enemies are very small groups and stuff like that, and you can easily kind of plow through them in some cases. And in other cases, you know, you may find them in large numbers, which obviously gives you a lot more enjoyment of fighting large number of enemies. But if you're a Dragon Quest fan, chances are you probably would have wanted to seen more unique enemies, more different enemies. In this case, you're going to be seeing somewhat the same enemies that you're familiar with, which can range from being just, you know, alright to kind of bland in a way. You know, you start to see the same enemies, and you kind of feel like you're being short-shotted of what the original Dragon Quest series has been known for, you know, to have lots of enemy designs and stuff. But while that might be the case, they also give you a lot of bosses. You know, there are some regular enemy bosses, but then you have the main story character bosses, you know, the same bosses, the bosses that you would fight that are featured in the anime and stuff like that. And this is where it gets really cool, because these are sometimes some of the more engaging and sometimes even the more complex fighting games that you can be a part of and stuff like that. Basically, the combat between the main game is simplistic, but then you fight the bosses that are based from the main anime, the main bosses themselves, and that's whenever the game gets a little bit interesting. You get through the same stuff over and over, but then by the time you get to the actual bosses themselves, they range from being absolute heck to fight to being somewhat annoying, because in some cases, and this is kind of the same way that Dragon Ball Z has been known for as well, you end up fighting the same character over and over again, which can be redundant. You know, you fight the same one like 3 times almost, and you're just like, at this point I'm familiar with their fighting pattern, so give me something unique, okay? I get it, they have to play through the anime and stuff like that, but at the same time too, it gets kind of annoying. It does. In a way, the main story is a little bit of a tedious playthrough. On the other hand though, while the main game story itself isn't something, you know, to kind of feel engaged or anything like that, really if nothing else, it feels kind of like your generic anime game, which, you know, sometimes they can be good and sometimes they can be bland. What Infinity Strash, I keep messing up that name. Infinity Strash does is that it provides a more roguelike element. So technically outside of the main story campaign, there is another campaign known as the Trial of Recollection, where basically you go through this gauntlet and you go through floor to floor, level to level, and your overall progress is to just get these memory cards. These memory cards that basically store a piece of storytelling history that goes on in The Legend of Dai and everything of that nature. And it's pretty cool, but each card has its own attribute that it gives off, different stats that they do. Either it gives stat increases or specific percentage increases. It may even increase certain move sets that will give the character an extra boost and everything like that. And these are staples. These can be leveled up, and the more cards you get, the more you can level them up to the next tier and everything like that, to where you can get stronger. So in other words, even though you're facing through the same trials over and over and over again, it has the same, like, best way to describe it, you know how in Hades, the roguelike game Hades, where basically you go through the gauntlet over and over again, but even though you die, you then come back and you increase your overall progression and stuff like that. It's sort of like that in a way. But unlike Hades, in this game's case, if you die in this trial, you lose everything. I do mean it. You lose everything. All the cards you collected, all the inventory you collected, all of that gets wiped clean. So that's kind of the downer, unfortunately. On the other hand, though, if you're careful about it, and say, for example, you get to a point to the floor where you're allowed to leave, then you retain all the stuff that you've attained. All the cards that you've gotten, all the gems, all the materials and stuff, all of that gets keep. The only thing that doesn't get kept are your restorative items and your level. Basically, all that gets reset. But your overall cards, overall materials, in order to increase your overall stats, as well as to increase the potential uses of the individual spells or techniques that you'll be using at the characters and stuff like that, those get all retained and stuff. You don't lose them, which is cool. So in other words, there is some form of progression, but only if you're careful. If in some cases you just try to go as far as you can until you die, you're not going to make very much progress, I'm afraid. It's better to pace yourself and kind of decide on how you're going to go about it, because in some cases you're just going to lose everything, and in which case that can be an annoying experience. But if you take your time with it, it's not as bad. And really, I found this part of the game probably the most enjoyable. Now technically I have beaten the main story campaign, but I did not complete the challenge mode campaign that it features, which is basically to fight off harder versions of the bosses that you fought in the main story. I have not done that. I've only done like the first character challenge mode boss, and even at level 66, which is what my characters are on and stuff like that, they are they are hard. They are hard. So I don't think I'm going to be doing that. I think if I do anything in regards to this game, I would rather try to complete the Trials of Recollection, because at least that one is the most enjoyable part in my personal opinion, and really the most fun I've had out of it. As for everything else, it depends on how you feel. You know, on the one hand, yeah, I would say the game ranges from being entertaining, but only entertaining if you're a fan. You know, if you're a fan of Dragon Quest, the game series per se, you might have a different feeling about how this should be played out and stuff like that. But if you're a fan of the anime The Avenger of Dai, that's a different story. Then chances are you might enjoy this one. So really this game kind of boils down to where you find the most enjoyment at. For me personally, the most enjoyment that I have out of this game is just from the Trials of Recollection. That part's actually the best part of the game. The main story campaign, it ranges from like being good to somewhat repetitive, depending. Gameplay wise is fun. I have no problems with it whatsoever. You do level up. The spells, they more or less are attained as you go through the chapters, much like how Dragon Ball Z has been known for. As you progress through the chapters, you attain more moves and stuff like that. Same thing with this game. Basically, as you progress through the story, you will eventually uncover new moves, new abilities, and stuff like that. That'll help you along your way. So the way I see it, it kind of has like this balance scales of being good to being you know what I mean? So with that being said, how would I rate this? The gameplay is good quality, but the demonstration is where it lacks, you know? Gameplay is fun and entertaining, but the story campaign is it feels repetitive to a degree, and you know, if you've seen the anime, then chances are you can easily skip through it. It's not a big deal. But if you haven't seen the anime, you're going to be sitting through it for a very long time. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, it can be good, but depending on who you are, you probably would have preferred watching the anime rather than just watching whatever was given you on screen. But the gameplay's good, and really the Trial of Recollection is actually the best part of the game, in my personal opinion. So if I had to rate this, I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5. Again, not to say that it's bad, just to say that the story campaign, the main thing, basically isn't as good as it could have been. Could have been a little bit better, but the Trial of Recollection is like the single solitary best part of the game, in my personal opinion. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next video. This is BlackCross sign off. Catch you guys later.
Oh, cunning! Your friends may have interrupted us, but they merely delayed the inevitable. Oh, bother!